We are Anka. Stay tuned for updated real news.
Hello, Anka Daily News viewers. We're here with a new crisis shaped in the shadow of war. In this period when the conflicts are getting more intense day by day, weapons are not the only things talking on the battlefield. On the invisible fronts of the war, a different enemy that the soldiers must fight has emerged. Some of the tactics used by the Russian army are now costing their own soldiers dearly. The methods used to gain an advantage on the front line can sometimes have unexpected consequences. A certain strategy used by the Russian troops was aimed at ensuring the effectiveness of military operations. However, this tactic inflicted much greater damage on the troops than anticipated. Now, the Russian army has to face not only Ukraine, but also a serious health crisis that's spreading rapidly behind the front lines. At the root of this health crisis are risky decisions taken by the army during its operations in certain areas. Symptoms, which initially appeared only among certain units, have spread over a wider area. As a result, the devastating effects of war are no longer confined to the front lines. Soldiers are also struggling with their own health. So, what exactly was this tactic used by the Russian army? What was the mistake that so seriously threatened the health of the soldiers? And most importantly, how does this crisis affect the soldiers fighting at the front? We'll share the answers to all these questions and the details of the developments with you all in a moment. We'll examine what has happened behind the scenes of this health disaster that affected Russian soldiers and how this situation could affect the course of the war together. Now, let's take a look at the details of this incident and the new crisis in the Russian army. Before we get to our report, a small reminder. The Anka Daily News team is completely real. None of my colleagues or me are artificial intelligence. Although artificial intelligence is very advanced, it's still not as good as us. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our daily reports and explanations. We do read all the comments you leave on our videos, so please continue to share your ideas about our content. Tell us in the comments what content you'd like to see on the Anka Daily News channel. And now let's start if you're ready. Anka Daily News reports. As the attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure continue, there has been an interesting development on the Russian front. Russian special forces trying to infiltrate Ukrainian territory tried to sneak through the gas pipeline. However, the result was a complete disaster. Until now, we've seen many different infiltration attempts, but it's not yet known who thought of moving through the gas pipeline. This bizarre and tragic operation exposed the desperation simmering in the Russian military strategy. This operation was planned and authorized by part of the Russian special forces. The aim was to advance to the Sumy region in northern Ukraine, specifically to the Suja border crossing. Normally, it's very difficult for military units to cross the border due to air defense systems and surveillance drones. However, Russian intelligence developed a new strategy in the belief that Ukraine wouldn't directly monitor the gas pipelines. A group of about 15 people were selected for the infiltration team. Some of these soldiers were special forces and some were engineers specialized in sabotage. They were told they would sneak into Ukrainian territory using pipelines and carry out sabotage operations in border areas. But the truth of the matter was that the plan made no sense at all. At midnight, the specially selected team set off from the Rostov region. The planned entry point was the huge gas pipeline running from Russia to Ukraine. The gas flow was temporarily stopped and the residual gas inside the pipe was said to have been evacuated. But who confirmed this information? This is where the real problem started. During first entry, soldiers entered the pipe wearing protective suits. Traveling through a narrow, dark and airless tunnel was already torture in and of itself. However, the most critical point of the operation was that the methane and other gases remaining inside were still not fully evacuated. From here on out, there are only speculations. According to some allegations, within 15 minutes, the effects of the gas began to manifest themselves: dizziness, nausea, and shortness of breath. It appears that it was almost impossible to communicate inside the pipeline. Some of the soldiers wanted to turn back, but it was impossible to maneuver in the narrow space. Within 30 minutes, half of the special forces had lost consciousness. Methane and other gases had reached lethal levels. When it became clear that the oxygen cylinders attached to their helmets were insufficient, chaos inside the pipeline began. The command center outside could not understand what was happening inside. Radio signals were cut off and there was no feedback. Within 45 minutes, all the Russian soldiers inside the pipe had either fainted or died. Sometime later, surveillance units on the border with Ukraine noticed abnormal gas movements coming out of the pipe. When Ukrainian intelligence analyzed the situation, they realized that Russian soldiers were trapped inside. Ukrainian troops arrived at the scene and observed the movements inside the pipe. After several hours of analysis, it became clear that most of the soldiers inside had died. Ukrainian soldiers announced the situation on their social media accounts with a sarcastic tone. Russian pipeline cleaners are now breathing Mendeleev's tableau. Gas pipe traveling turned out to be risky. Who would have thought? The Russian reaction to the revelation was also harsh. The Kremlin initially tried to cover up the incident. However, when the story leaked to both the Russian and Western media, the authorities were inevitably forced to issue a statement. The Ministry of Defense first denied the leak. It then issued a statement saying that a gas leak occurred during a military exercise. However, independent sources and satellite images proved this to be false. This failed operation caused a major demoralization in the Russian army. Frontline troops once again realized how helpless the command had become. On the Ukrainian front, this incident was interpreted as another example of Russian desperation in their war strategy. In addition, Ahmed medical teams made an intense effort to save some of the soldiers affected by the gas. However, according to the information received, most of the rescued soldiers are facing permanent lung damage, despite all medical interventions to open the lungs, which are 90% blocked. Most of the survivors are unable to continue fighting. This catastrophic incident shows how desperate Russia has become in the war. Trying to use the gas pipe as an infiltration route shows how poorly planned the military is. What do you think? Who do you think Russia will blame for this failed operation? What strategic advantages can Ukraine gain from this incident? Are such risky operations a sign of the Russian military's desperation? Let us know in the comments. We read and care about your points of view.